August 18th, 2018, 10:15 a.m. In front of the grand entrance of the Detroit Classic Car Show, an old man stood waiting, ignored by everyone. With his faded Black Sabbath t-shirt, round sunglasses, and hair falling to his shoulders, he looked ordinary. But this man was also the owner of the 1959 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz, the star exhibit of this year's show, and he could barely even drive. Over the next 47 minutes, one of the most unforgettable moments in classic car history was about to unfold, because sometimes the most valuable things come in the most unexpected packages. Detroit's Hart Plaza was hosting the most prestigious classic car event of the year. The Midwest Concours d'Elegance wasn't just a car show, it was a spectacle where multi-million-dollar rare vehicles were displayed, where collectors prepared for an entire year, where tickets sold out months in advance. The line stretching from the entrance was filled with men in tailored suits, women in elegant hats, and gentlemen in linen jackets. The dress code was clear: smart casual minimum. Security guards standing on either side of the gate were politely but firmly turning away anyone who didn't meet the dress requirements. And right at that moment, a black Mercedes van pulled up to the curb. The man who stepped out was not the kind of guest the show was expecting. He gave a slight wave to his driver. Sharon had something urgent to attend to, so this time he had come alone. Normally Sharon would organize everything, but today Ozzy Osbourne was on his own, and that was reason enough for everything to go wrong. Ozzy's relationship with classic cars ran deeper than most people knew. Yes, everyone knew he was a rock legend. Yes, everyone knew about Black Sabbath, the Bat incident, the television show, but very few knew that this man had never been able to drive properly his entire life, yet harbored a deep passion for classic cars. Ozzy had finally gotten his driver's license on his 19th attempt at the age of 60, but that had never diminished his love for cars. Quite the opposite. Because he couldn't drive them, he watched them more, researched them more, collected them more. 12 classic cars sat in his garage, and he knew the story of each one by heart. The 1959 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz was Ozzy's most prized possession. This car wasn't just a classic. For Ozzy, it was a symbol. Growing up on the poor streets of Birmingham, young John Osbourne would watch Cadillacs pass by his window and dream of owning one someday. While his father worked night shifts and his mother went off to cleaning jobs, he would stand on street corners watching rich men's cars go by. Years later, when he became one of the most famous rock stars in the world, one of the first things he did was search for this car. It took him 7 years to find it. He spent 3 years and $500,000 having it restored, and now this car had been selected as the star exhibit of the Midwest Concours d'Elegance. As Ozzy walked toward the gate, he heard murmurs behind him. People waiting in line were looking at his clothes and messy hair with judgment in their eyes. Whispers began. A woman leaned over to her husband and said something, and they both snickered. Ozzy was used to these looks. He had been dealing with this for 50 years. People either recognized him and screamed, or didn't recognize him and judged him. There was rarely anything in between. When he approached the security guard, the expression on the young man's face said everything. His eyebrows were furrowed, his lips were tight, and his hand was already reaching for his radio. The security guard was in his mid-20s, short-haired and fit. His name tag read Kyle, and it was clear he took this job extremely seriously. When Ozzy approached, Kyle raised his hand in a stop gesture. Politely but firmly, he explained that this was a private event with a dress code requirement. Ozzy paused for a moment. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was his invitation, sent personally by the organizer, Richard Brennan. He held it out to Kyle, but Kyle didn't even look at the paper. "Sir, the dress code is not an exception. It applies to everyone," he said. He added that perhaps he could try again tomorrow with appropriate attire. A voice rose from behind. A man in his 40s, wearing a perfectly tailored linen suit, stood behind Ozzy with 2 similarly dressed friends. His voice was both impatient and mocking. "Move aside, old man. Some of us actually have business here." he said. His friends laughed. Ozzy turned and looked at the man. It was impossible to see what was behind his eyes. The sunglasses hid everything. He simply nodded slightly and stepped aside. The man in the linen suit walked past with a triumphant smile. Kyle saluted him respectfully and opened the door. Ozzy retreated to a shaded corner a few meters from the door. He leaned his back against the wall and began to wait. If Sharon had been there, the organizer would have come running by now, apologizing over and over. But Ozzy didn't make a call. Maybe he wanted to prove something. Or maybe he was just tired. His Parkinson's diagnosis hadn't been announced to the public yet, but Ozzy had started to feel the symptoms. His left hand trembled sometimes. He couldn't wake up as energetic as he used to. And sometimes, just sometimes, he felt a strange comfort when people didn't recognize him, when they treated him like an ordinary person. But this time was different. This time he had come to see his own car, and he wasn't being let in. Inside the show, in the center of the grand exhibition hall, there was a platform surrounded by velvet ropes. And on that platform, under the spotlights, the 1959 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz stood gleaming. Its red paint had been polished so deeply that you could see your own reflection in it. The chrome accessories caught the sunlight. The white leather interior was spotless. Organizer Richard Brennan was circling the car, making final checks. He turned to his assistant and asked where the owner was. Mr. Osbourne's driver should have dropped him off an hour ago. The assistant shrugged. He said they could check the entrance records. Brennan shook his head. Having a world-famous rock legend go missing at his own event was not a good look. Outside, Ozzy continued waiting in his corner. Most people passing by didn't even look at him. Maybe they thought he was homeless. Ozzy knew this feeling. He had felt the same way as a poor kid from Birmingham. Rich people would walk past him without a glance, as if he were invisible, as if he didn't exist. 50 years had passed and he had made millions. But that feeling was still there, just below the surface, waiting. When the clock approached 11:40, something happened. Someone came rushing out from inside the show. A man in a suit, in his 40s, with panic written across his face. It was Richard Brennan, the organizer himself. He came to the security checkpoint at the door and asked Kyle something. "Has Mr. Osbourne arrived?" he was asking. Older, long hair, most likely wearing black. Kyle thought for a moment. Then his expression changed. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head toward the corner. Ozzy was still standing there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching the world from behind his sunglasses. Brennan's face went white. And at that moment, the most embarrassing incident in the history of the Midwest Concours d'Elegance was about to begin. Richard Brennan hurried toward the corner. With each step, the panic on his face deepened. Kyle followed behind him, but the expression on his face wasn't panic. It was pure horror. Brennan stopped a few steps in front of Ozzy, and for a moment didn't know what to say. Then he took a deep breath and began to speak. "Mr. Osbourne," he said, his voice trembling, struggling to find the words. "I'm Richard Brennan, the organizer of the show. I don't know what to say to you. This is unacceptable. Words aren't enough to apologize." Ozzy lowered his sunglasses slightly and looked into Brennan's eyes. In those blue eyes there was neither anger nor resentment, just a hint of tiredness and maybe, just maybe, a trace of amusement. "No worries, mate," Ozzy said in that familiar Birmingham accent. "I got to clear my head a bit while I waited." But for Brennan, this was a problem. They had made one of the most famous rock stars in the world wait at the door of his own event for an hour. If this hit social media, if it made the news, everything would be ruined. He clasped his hands together and began apologizing again. Meanwhile, Kyle stood a few steps back, frozen in place. His face had gone white as chalk. He had just turned away Ozzy Osbourne. He had refused the legendary vocalist of Black Sabbath, one of the most iconic figures in rock history, over a dress code. And on top of that, the men behind him had called him an old man, and Kyle had done nothing. His knees felt like they were about to give out. Ozzy wasn't paying attention to Brennan's flood of apologies. His gaze had shifted to Kyle. He saw the horror on the young man's face, the trembling of his hands, the tears welling up in his eyes. And in an instant, he was transported 50 years back. The grey streets of Birmingham. 15 years old, his first job at a factory. He had given a customer the wrong part, and the boss had yelled at him in front of everyone. He still remembered how he felt that day, that moment when the world collapsed on top of him. This young man was feeling the same thing right now. He thought he was going to lose his job. Maybe he had a family. Maybe he was paying rent. Maybe this job was everything to him. Ozzy didn't know any of that, but he recognized that look. Brennan was still talking. He was saying the security guard would be terminated immediately, that disciplinary proceedings would be initiated, that this would never happen again. Ozzy raised his hand and Brennan fell silent. "Hold on a minute, mate," Ozzy said. He walked past Brennan and stood directly in front of Kyle. The young man was on the verge of tears. "What's your name, son?" Ozzy asked. Kyle swallowed hard. His voice cracked, but he answered, "Kyle Matthews, sir." Ozzy nodded. "Kyle," he said, "you did your job. There were rules. You enforced the rules. This isn't your fault. Someone told you what to do and you listened. I don't see a problem here." Kyle couldn't believe it. A tear slipped from his eye, but he quickly wiped it away. "But sir," he said, "I should have recognized you. Ozzy laughed. That short, raspy, world-famous laugh. "Should have recognized me?" he said. "Son, I'm 70 years old, and I still can't recognize myself sometimes. You're a young man. You take your job seriously. That's a good thing. Now, will you let me in? I'd like to see my car." Shock, gratitude, and shame danced across Kyle's face all at once. "Yes, sir," he said, and immediately headed for the door. But this time it was different. This time he walked ahead of Ozzy with respect, opened the door all the way, and with a slight bow, invited him inside. When they stepped inside the show, Brennan was rushing alongside them, barking orders into his radio. "Our VIP guest has arrived. Clear the way. Notify the press," he was saying. But Ozzy wasn't hearing any of it. His eyes were locked on the platform in the center of the exhibition hall. There, under the spotlights, in the area surrounded by velvet ropes, stood the 1959 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz. Its red paint was gleaming. Its chrome accessories caught the light. And Ozzy was transported 60 years back. On the streets of Birmingham, a little boy had his nose pressed against a showroom window, staring at the Cadillac inside. "One day," that boy had said, "one day I'll have a car like that." And now, here he was. The people around him were starting to realize who he was. Whispers rose. Phones came out. But Ozzy didn't see any of it. He stopped in front of the velvet rope and for a moment said nothing. He just looked. This car wasn't just metal and rubber to him. This car was a dream, a symbol of escaping poverty, of success, of survival. Every time he saw this car, he remembered where he came from. And remembering where he came from was more important to Ozzy than anything else. Because when a person forgets where they came from, they forget who they are. Just then, a voice rose from the crowd. That familiar, mocking voice. The man in the linen suit, the one who had just called Ozzy an old man, was approaching the Cadillac with his friends. "Well, well," he said loudly. "I wonder who owns this car. Must be worth millions." One of his friends answered. "Apparently some rock star, someone called Ozzy Osbourne. You know, that crazy bat-eating guy." Everyone in the group laughed. But then, the man turned his eyes to the figure standing next to the car, and his laughter died in his throat. Because the man he had just pushed aside, called an old man, told to move, was now standing next to this $1,000,000 car. And everyone was looking at him with respect. Watching the color change on the man's face was almost a physical experience. First red, then white, then red again. His friends had already started to scatter. Nobody wanted to be seen with him. The man was left alone, a few meters from Ozzy, not knowing what to do. Finally, he gathered his courage and approached. "Mr. Osbourne," he said, his voice trembling. "I was just outside. I didn't recognize you. Ozzy stopped him. "I know," he said. "But don't worry, I didn't recognize a lot of people in my life either. I treated some of them badly. Then I regretted it. What matters isn't what you did, it's what you do after." The man didn't know what to say for a moment. Then he just bowed his head and disappeared into the crowd. Ozzy didn't even look after him, because something else had caught his attention. Outside the velvet ropes, at the very back of the crowd, a small boy was standing. About 11 or 12 years old clothes, worn-out shoes. His father was beside him too. Ozzy turned to Brennan and asked, "Who's that kid?" Brennan looked at the crowd. He noticed the man next to the boy, in his blue coveralls with a mop in his hand. "Must be the son of someone from the cleaning crew, sir," he said. "Sometimes they bring their kids. They watch from a distance. But they're not allowed near the cars, of course." Ozzy thought for a moment. Then he stepped out from behind the velvet rope and began making his way through the crowd. The boy's father tried to step back in surprise, nearly dropping his mop, but Ozzy smiled at him. "Is your son into cars?" he asked. The father swallowed. "Yes, sir," he said. "Marcus is crazy about classic cars. I bring him here during my breaks. He watches from afar. He's not allowed to get close, but at least he can see them." Ozzy looked at the boy. "Marcus," he said, "would you like to come with me? Let me show you that car up close." The boy's eyes grew wide. He looked at his father, then at Ozzy, then back at his father again. The father didn't know what to say, but Ozzy had already taken the boy's hand and was making his way through the crowd. People watched in astonishment. The rock legend was walking toward his $1,000,000 car with a small boy on his arm. And in that moment, the show stopped being just a car exhibition. It became a story. When they reached the Cadillac, Ozzy opened the car door for Marcus. "Would you like to sit inside?" he asked. Marcus held his breath. "Can I really sit in it?" Ozzy laughed. "Of course, son. This car isn't for driving. It's for dreaming. Get in, hold the steering wheel, close your eyes, and go wherever you want to go." Marcus climbed into the car. He sat on the white leather seat. His hands reached for the steering wheel. He closed his eyes. And in that moment, a small boy in his old clothes was behind the wheel of one of the most expensive classic cars in the world, just like a boy in Birmingham had dreamed 60 years ago. That day, Ozzy Osbourne stayed at the show for 2 more hours. He examined every car, talked to every collector, accepted every photo request. But the person he spent the most time with was Marcus. After that day, Kyle Matthews continued working as a security guard. But something had changed. Now when he stopped someone at the door, he looked into their eyes first, not at their suit. If this story touched you, hit the like button and subscribe to the Prince of Darkness stories, because sometimes the Prince of Darkness is actually the brightest light in the room.